Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Edward R. Roybal Chamber. I've been joined by the Honorable Councilmember Mitch Englander. Today we have a very exciting agenda. We're too serious in here, folks. I do want to thank you for being here and making it through the parking garage and actually finding parking and getting here. Just a couple of housekeeping. One is that the acoustics in this room are terrible. So I'm trying to speak slowly, deliberately, so that you can understand what I'm saying. So that means anyone carrying a conversation right now does take away from our ability to understand the speaker. So I appreciate if you can take your conversations outside. Second, when you come to the microphone, give us your name and address. And many of you have written eloquent letters, but you're going to have 1 minute to speak. So if you can get to the main point of your statement, that would help us tremendously. If you find yourself in a point where everything you wanted to say has been said, it's okay to say, I agree with the previous speaker, and give us anything new. But to hear the same thing over and over and over again does not allow this committee to move forward. So I would appreciate your consideration. So that being said, we do have an item on this agenda, and I try to make it a practice that when I have the police department involved in a case, I would rather have the police department doing their job out in the city and not stuck in this room, that we prioritize that item. So, Roberto, if you can let us know, is it item 7 or 8?
It's item 7, Councilman.
Item 7?
An appeal by Elida Banda, and she's appealing the determination of the zoning administrator, which imposed conditions on the operation of Dora's nightclub in CD6.
Okay, before we get there, I jumped the gun. Let me run through the calendar, the agenda really fast. On item 1, it's a consent item. We do have 2 cards. Do you still feel compelled to speak? Okay, great. I know there's clarifications. We'll put those on the record. Okay. Again, that's with clarifications to be submitted by the applicant. So we'll be expecting those. Number 2 and would be consent. 3, 4, and 5 are on consent. Councilmember, if you're in agreement, we can move those. 2, 3, 4, and 5, as well as number 1 with clarifications from the applicant. We can move those. We could also, item 9, per the applicant, continue to plumb to June 25th. Seems like something's going to blow up. Okay. Item 10. My understanding is that the applicant, along with the council office, wants to continue this item to June 18th. So that takes care of a good chunk of the agenda. And we did get a second on those consents, and those dates have been duly noted. Okay, Roberto, so you had just given us a summary of item number 7?
Yes, unless you want to hear from Mr. Legrand before that, Mr.
Okay.
Reyes.
Nicholas Brown, Associate Zoning Administrator. Dora's Bar is located in Sun Valley on Sunland Boulevard. In 1969, it received a certificate of occupancy to change its use from a store to a tavern with dancing. Now, Being in 1969 means that it was prior to our regulations that regulate through conditional use the CUB, the sale of alcohol, as well as the dancing CUX. So it had non-conforming rights. Now there are several ways that they can lose the non-conforming rights. One is that they expand and therefore have to go through the conditional use permit process. Another is that they cease operation for a year and lose non-conforming rights. But the other is that they operate in a manner that cause us to go forward with a public nuisance, the revocation process, and therefore they have lost non-conforming rights that way. Well, in July of last year, I conducted a public hearing, and it was at that public hearing I heard sufficient evidence from LAPD that Dora's Place, Dora's Bar, Dora's Nightclub is a problem. Some of the things that were mentioned were solicitation by bar girls, the display of body parts, assault with a deadly weapon, public urination, robbery, battery, and stabbing. However, when I conducted the public hearing last year, I also saw that there was a new owner, and my belief was that it was possible that that could turn things around. So what I did was I took it under advisement, and I allowed time for LAPD and the operator to work out a settlement agreement in hopes that that would be what would be used to operate the facility. And that way they can eliminate the almost $50,000 cost in imposing conditions and going through the approval of plans review process. But instead of receiving a settlement agreement, instead I received in September, 3 months later, a letter from LAPD that problems still continued. So therefore I prepared the determination that is before you that has been appealed, and that determination are conditions that were recommended by LAPD. There was one condition that they recommended that I did not include as they wanted in this determination, and that was the hours of operation. They actually wanted this bar to close at 12 midnight every night, but it is a bar. And what I instead did, and one of the conditions was to allow them to be open 2 a.m. on Friday and Saturday, but close at 12 at all other times of the week. That concludes my presentation. If you have no questions at this time, LAPD would like to come forward and provide you with detail of their efforts and experience with this facility.
In terms of the new owner, how long is it now that they have been in control of the property?
That I'm not sure of. I think at the time, however, I heard the case, they were a new owner as of about a year.
A year? So it's been more than a year.
So about a year plus.
So the conditions you described have been existing for more than a year now?
Well, yes. However, they are not required to comply with the conditions until the conclusion of this process.
No, but I understand, but the prevailing conditions that brought this to this moment.
If I may, though, these conditions are not onerous. They are the kind of standard conditions that we place upon these type of uses. And so it to me seems like this is something that could have been easily have dealt with by complying with the conditions. But as LAPD will testify, as we continue to see problems, even with the time they filed an appeal to this, and today, there are still problems.
Therefore, the problems have been in place, and community has been enduring these problems for that amount of time as well.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Brown?
Do we know if any of the previous employees prior to the change of ownership remained as employees at the facility?
That is a question, and that was presented by LAPD at the time of the public hearing, and they may be able to discuss that more with you.
And has, under all of these conditions that were effective, particularly some of the training, the STAR training, etc., that was required, do we know if those, and as well as the security officers, if any of these were followed through on since the change of ownership?
They have submitted a letter that shows that they have complied with maybe 3 of the conditions. Several of the items in their letter don't even relate to the conditions. I would say they have not substantially complied with the conditions of approval.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. So we do have the appellants here, but we'll hear from the officers for the sake of time, and then we'll ask the appellants to come forward. Please give us your name.
Great. Hi, I'm Officer Esther Vasquez. My address is Foothill Station, 12760 Osborne in Pacoima. I am the senior lead officer for the area in which Dora's Place operates. I've been doing that for about 5 years now. I can bring forth just the quality of life issues and some of the crime issues that have occurred. I have a neighborhood watch group there, Crockett Street Neighborhood Watch, and they've always expressed concern for this location. Some of the concerns that they have are that some of the crime that comes to this location, that's attracted to this location, the patrons' irresponsibility by urinating in their grass area, loud talking after hours, hanging out by their car because they do park down the street from there, and fighting. So those are some of the problems we have besides some of the crime problems that we did have, such as the ADWs and the robberies and things like that occurred, as well as the inside crime areas, which our vice unit will talk about. And I will have them up right now.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Sergeant Jesse Ojeda. Address is 12760 Osborne Street, Foothill Division. During the time from October 2011 to January of this year, I was the acting officer in charge of the vice unit at Foothill Division. During that time, we had numerous undercover operations at the location 8220 Sunland Boulevard at Dora's Place. Some of them not to include is illegal solicitation of alcohol, driving under the influence, and service to intoxicated persons. It was a location that we currently worked that we, when I, as officer in charge of the unit, it was a location that we constantly worked because of numerous calls for service there.
That covers the extent of your report?
Yes.
Okay, any questions for the officers? Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Officer Cindy Schreiner from Detective Support and Vice Division, located out of PAB across the street. Back in 2009, Foothill Division basically suggested our support in regards to the location of Dora's. It was an ongoing nuisance that was out of control. So from that day forward, we put our case together, presented it to zoning, which started back in August of 2012. At that time, Ms. Banda attended, stated she was a new owner to the business, and Mr. Nick Brown basically gave her a chance, and we gave her those suggested conditions. During that time of our investigation, we realized that Mrs. Banda was on several documents from years prior for the business. I don't know what the ties were, but in fact, she did know the owners. Approximately 45 days later, after the suggested conditions were imposed, we did a compliance check. During that time, 4 drunk service violations were completed, as well as numerous B-girl violations. At that time, we submitted all of our information to Mr. Brown at zoning. Actually, on that same evening, as we were exiting the location, there was a Valley traffic officer outside posted, and when I spoke with him, he basically stated that over a 4-year period, he had obtained 200 DUI arrests for that specific location, and he had a complete spreadsheet on Dora's. Again, we compiled all our information, and in February of 2013, the conditions were implemented, approximately 18, on the business. Of course, she appealed, and on May 21st was the original plum date hearing date. 4 days prior, my unit, ABC, and Foothill went into the location for an existing compliance check. That specific night, 2 drunk services were completed, one being Mrs. Banda, the owner of Dora's. So it is our opinion that they have no regard for the laws as well as the conditions that are put on the land there, and we deny the appeal.
Thank you, madam. Thank you for your work. Councilmember?
A couple questions. couple of observations and just looking at all the paperwork on this as well. I just find it incredible, and that 200 DUI arrests, you said?
Yes.
In addition to assault with a deadly weapon, battery, brandishing a weapon, assault, robbery, solicitation of alcohol on site, selling to minors, urinating in public, illegal vending on the sidewalk, a long, long list of issues. You'd indicated that this new owner perhaps has a relationship. When you refer to this person as an owner, is it for us to assume that this person actually purchased the property?
That was her statements, that she did purchase it, but...
Because I have a copy here that is, it's a lease, not a purchase. And in fact, she does not own the site. It is simply leasing it and running the business, apparently, under the same ownership, but as a lease, according to the documents here. What I also find fascinating is the leasing firm, as well as the leasing agent, are the same company as well.
Correct. We kind of see it as a hidden type of ownership, is what ABC would recall it as to be. And the same night that we did our undercover operation, she said she did not know the prior owner, which she exited the location in the vehicle of the owner of the prior business.
And wearing dual hats, and as the chair of public safety, and looking at the long history and how many resources we've used with LAPD and the rest of the city family on this, not to mention what this could have caused or probably did cause in terms of harm to the local community. We don't know perhaps what accidents or fatalities occurred in relation to DUIs. I mean, these were only the ones that were caught.
Correct.
200 DUIs from this specific location that we identified. Is there a reason that we're not asking for, in light of all of this information and this long history of failure to comply, we're not asking for a revocation in this case?
That was our suggestion in the beginning, was revocation, but when we put forward, I think Mr. Brown wanted to give her the chance because of all the documentation. She claimed that she was new ownership, which...
Well, clearly she's not. We've got a copy of the lease. She's not a new owner.
I understand. Perhaps, Mr. Brown, would you like to respond to that question?
The standard procedure that we've come to in the way of lawsuits is that we first impose conditions and we give them an opportunity to comply with the conditions. We set an approval of plans review, and this one it's 6 months, and we then see if they are in compliance, and if we have been successful in mitigating the impacts. If they show an unwillingness to comply with the conditions that we're not able to mitigate, then we take that step of revocation. But we first must impose conditions and give them opportunity. Okay,
so this could be a step towards.
Yes.
And
should that happen?
You'll end up reporting back in 6 months?
6 months.
Okay. Only if it's...
That's condition number 8.
Yeah, I just want to make sure this is not being predetermined. Okay, thank you. Okay. Did Claudia de la Cruz... Officer de la Cruz.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Officer Claudia de la Cruz, LAPD Foothill Station. I've been with the department for 4 years, with Foothill for 2 years. I agree with everything the previous speakers have talked about, and I am now working vice, but previous I was 1 year in patrol, and this location, 8220 Sunland, has always been a problem with radio calls and so forth. And you have the list in regards to what type of radio calls there were there, sir.
Okay. Thank you. That was the best presentation. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Very tight. Oh, good. Okay, so that covers the city's reports. Now we'll open it to the appellant. I believe that Mr. Roberto Ramirez, representing Elida Banda.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, I'm here to speak on behalf of Ms. Banda. The situation with Ms. Banda is the previous owner, operator, and also the owner of the property was a gentleman by the name of Mariano Sanchez. He owned the property. That property was sold to another gentleman by the name of Jose Hernandez. Mr. Hernandez rented the bar, that location, because he bought the property to Ms. Banda. Ms. Banda has been running the bar as a president of the corporation since approximately December of 2011. A lot of the problems that have been related to this distinguished board have taken place under the stewardship of Mr. Sanchez when he was there previously, I believe, from 2007 to 2000, through all the way through 2011. With respect to, she did have some, I believe some citations were issued recently, which she is disputing with respect to the legitimacy of those citations that were issued recently. She hasn't been in this location for the long period of time that has been related to. She's only been at this location since, as I say, December 2011. So it's been about a little bit over a year and a half. She has made an attempt to clean up the property to the best of her ability. She would ask that she be allowed to continue in her efforts to try to clean up the property and clean up the location. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. No questions, Ms. Ramirez? One question, sir.
Just a quick question. And you are representing in what capacity?
Ms. Banda.
In what capacity? Are you her counsel?
I'm a lawyer.
Her lawyer. Is she here?
Yes, she's in the back, yes.
She's here?
She is here. She doesn't speak English very well, sir.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, given that, Mr. Brown, if you don't mind, when I look at the context of this case, I see that in your assessment, you provided the new owner time to clean up and improve the establishment, and to the degree that they could mitigate the problems that had been associated to this establishment. It's been more than a year to do that. And based on the evidence from the officers, it seems that there's very little traction and very little end result in making it a place where the quality of life for the local area could improve. So that being said, I would move that we deny the appeal and sustain the zoning administrator's determination for the CLA on behalf of the CD6, the district office, based on the evidence before us and your analysis. Would you have a second on that? Yes. So that'll be the action of this committee, and that should do it. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Okay, that does take care of item number 7. On item 8, my understanding is that we could continue that item based on the request of the parties involved for 30 days. What I'd like to do is have a report back on how parking issues are being resolved per the Subdivision Map Act, given that the information did surface during the report that was forwarded that was aligned with this case. I just would appreciate a report back to allow the decision makers at this committee to understand how that was determined and how that was defined.
And that directive is to the planning department.
Right.
Yes.
That is for the planning department to provide that report on that particular issue, and hopefully continue in a much more transparent fashion in dealing with that particular level of work. That takes care of 7 and 8. Where does that leave us?
Would you like to hear the weekly report from Mr. Legrand?
Mr. Legrand, do you want to share a report?
Sure.
Now, how did you get rid of the curtains in this room?
One more time? Good afternoon, council members. Mike LeGrand, Director of Planning. I'll be very brief. I'd like to first of all thank the City Council for approving the contract to enter into revising our 1946 zoning code. That was approved by the Plum Committee a few weeks ago and has been forwarded to the City Council and approved unanimously by the City Council this morning at their meeting. So we're very happy to start that 5-year work program to be able to update Los Angeles' 1946 zoning code and make it something that reflects the city we are today and help guide us into the future of development in Los Angeles. In addition, a few exciting things. We'll be having a press event tomorrow that I believe the Councilmember Reyes will be speaking at on this zoning code with the Mayor's office. I'm really excited to see that move forward. We're also preparing to come back. We've had a number of meetings regarding the realignment of city departments, and as promised, we'll be coming back before the end of June to give you a status update on that. In a nutshell, the CAO and CLA have been very actively working with us on holding internal city working group meetings as we begin the process to bring in the consultant to help us administer the realignment of the departments as called out in the report approved by the Plum Committee. So we're looking forward to have that department be opening its doors on January 1st of 2014, and we'll be making quarterly presentations to the Plum Committee and working with the chair of the Plum Committee on establishing industry working groups and working groups with our neighborhood constituents as we move forward. So we're very happy to report that and to continue that work and look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Mr. LeGrand. You know, just teasing you about the curtains, right? It's a lot brighter in here. Okay. All right. So that takes us to the next item.
That's the remaining item, Councilman, which is a report from the Cultural Heritage Commission, which declined the inclusion of the Tuna Canyon Detention Station as a historic cultural monument in CD7.
I want to thank everybody for your patience. This is the item. Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. Ken Bernstein with the Department of City Planning and Office of Historic Resources. I want to give you some background on what is a fairly complex and unusual historic cultural monument application. This has been brought to you through City Council initiation, initiated by Council Member Richard Alarcon. This is for the site of the former Tuna Canyon Detention Station located in the Tujunga community. This is a property that began as a camp for the New Deal Civilian Conservation Corps in 1933, a federal public works program. By 1941, the use was vacated by the CCC. The buildings were intact. But as World War II began, the site transitioned into a temporary internment camp for Japanese American, and other detainees. This was one of the first temporary detention facilities established and was named the Tuna Canyon Detention Station Immigration and Naturalization Service. However, following the internment camp's closure, the property changed ownership twice and was significantly altered from its original condition. Los Angeles County purchased some of the property in 1947. This was a probation school for young boys. And in 1960, the Verdugo Hills Golf Course was constructed on the property. All of the original buildings were demolished at that time. The landscape and topography were also altered to some degree to accommodate the golf course facilities. The area of the property that we believe housed most of the camp facilities today is largely encompassed by a golf driving range as part of this 18-hole par 3 golf course. The council motion argues that the site meets historic cultural monument criteria as a site in which the broad cultural, economic, and social history of this community is reflected or exemplified. The staff of the Office of Historic Resources and the Cultural Heritage Commission, however, found that local history may only be reflected or exemplified if a site still has an ability to convey the historic associations that made it significant in the first place. The commission and staff did do a site inspection of the property and determined that the site no longer retained integrity dating back to its period of significance from 1933 to 1946 due to the demolition activity. And so our finding was that the property does not appear to be eligible for local designation as a historic cultural monument based on those factors. Procedurally, because this nomination was brought to you, was initiated by the City Council, normally you at Plum Committee and City Council do not see nominations that were declined by the Cultural Heritage Commission. They would normally stop at that point, not proceed on to Council. Because this was council initiated, it does proceed on to council, requires 10 votes to approve. I just want to say in conclusion, this is a particularly difficult case. It certainly was for our staff and was for the Cultural Heritage Commission. This is a site of unquestionable historic significance. This is probably the only Japanese-American internment site or site related to that shameful chapter in our history in the entire city of Los Angeles. And we certainly thank the council office and the community for raising awareness of this important chapter in our history. As we can see by the turnout today, this nomination alone has elevated public awareness and understanding of this period in our history. Our office is certainly interested in working with the community regardless of what happens with this nomination to develop appropriate interpretive programming for this site, signage, displays, exhibitions, etc., to better educate and inform visitors about the site's history and its role during the Japanese-American internment. We certainly also want to partner with the community, the council office, and others to pursue federal funding that is available for these Japanese-American internment sites and other private sources of funding to interpret this history. However, it is with some regret, once again, that we convey the findings of the Cultural Heritage Commission that the site is ineligible for designation as a historic cultural monument. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions, Councilman? Okay. Oh, don't go far. Okay. We do have quite a number of cards here, and we'll go to the folks who support the designation. I'd like to ask the council office representative, Mr. Gerald Gubaton, to come to the microphone. Good afternoon, sir.
Hi, good afternoon. Gerald Gubaton, Chief Planning Deputy with Councilmember Richard Alarcon. You could just... Councilman Alarcon is in Sacramento today with his Young Senators program. He wanted to be here, but in lieu of his presence, he's asked me to read this letter into the record, and I gave copies to the clerk, and you may have seen it, but if you bear with me, I'll just go forward and read it verbatim. Dear Council Members Reyes, Huizar, and Englander, as an elected representative of the Northeast San Fernando Valley for the last 20 years, and as a resident born and raised in the Valley, I am intimately familiar with the Valley's Japanese-American community, although its history may not be well known. As a youth, I took judo lessons at the San Fernando Valley Japanese-American Community Center a few blocks from my house. My father's house was adjacent to a neighborhood in which many Japanese-Americans settled after World War II. I was a neighbor of Valley icon Harry Nakata, who helped design and maintain the city's Japanese garden at the Tillman plant. In 2012, my office co-sponsored a special event organized by the San Fernando Valley Community Center to raise funds on behalf of earthquake and tsunami victims in Japan. I believe the history of the Valley's Japanese-American community has not been properly recognized. The San Fernando Valley has no officially acknowledged Japanese-American historic sites. During World War II, innocent Japanese-Americans were forcibly removed from their homes, farms, businesses, and churches, denied their civil liberties, and incarcerated by the U.S. government. Following the war, as they sought to rebuild their lives, there was a general reluctance to acknowledge what had happened to Japanese Americans. American society would not seriously consider publicly admitting this wartime mistake, and many Japanese Americans remained reticent about freely sharing their feelings about wartime experience, which became an untold story. I strongly support the community's effort to reclaim their history. Upon learning the historically significant events associated with the Tuna Detention Station site, I initiated its nomination as a city historic cultural monument. The site fulfills the criteria of the Cultural Heritage Ordinance. It is a site of particular historical significance to the city of Los Angeles, quote, in which the broad cultural, political, economic, or social history of the nation, state, or community is reflected or exemplified, unquote. The history associated with the site is indisputable. The Tunya Canyon Detention Station processed more than 2,500 individuals, predominantly Japanese, as well as Germans, Italians, and Japanese Peruvians. I disagree with the Cultural Heritage Commission's findings that the property, quote, no longer retains integrity relating to the 1933 through 1946 historical associations because all physical buildings and structures no longer remain. My office has reviewed an aerial photograph, which we've produced here, circa 1950 and 1952, which was not presented at the Cultural Heritage Commission, showing the original building footprints and the facility's boundaries before demolition. And then we compared it to a recent photo from 2005. Clearly, no original buildings remain. However, mature oaks, which remain amazingly intact today, were located within the detention station's original boundaries. The ordinance allows the monument designation of any site, including significant trees or plant life on the site. I therefore ask that monument designation encompass the original detention station's boundaries, within which a smaller area with a mature oak grove, which are landscape features associated with a detention station, may be set aside as a place to install the appropriate commemorative improvements. Okay, I'm winding down, so thanks for bearing with me. The effort has garnered broad-based support. We have an attached list of Japanese American individuals, historical societies, civil rights groups from the American Islamic community, the Italian American Museum, academics, clergy. An online petition has generated 1,230 individuals who've supported the effort. I strongly urge the Plum Committee to grant monument designation. The recent release of records by the National Archives, along with research by the local historical society and Asian American scholars, have shed light on this little-known episode in the history of Los Angeles. Monument designation will not stop future redevelopment, but will ensure that a portion of the site is set aside to commemorate history and promote education about injustice and civil liberties for future generations.
Mr. Guitar?
Yeah.
I want you to finish because I do have a question. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm almost done. It would allow the placement of a plaque on site, open opportunities to pursue federal grant funds under the National Park Service's Japanese American Confinement Sites program, for which Congress has appropriated $38 million to provide educational enhancements and other appropriate commemorative improvements. In closing, finally, the designation offers an opportunity to provide a learning moment about the Japanese American experience, long a part of our city's multicultural history and indeed part of American history. It will help prevent the erasure of a once untold story so that we do not repeat past mistakes. Yours truly, Richard Alarcon.
Mr. Guitan, when you refer to, and I see the snapshot here, this aerial photo, when you compare it to the newer, can you tell me what portion is it that is of concern, that they want to preserve, that needs to be preserved from your point of view? Can you show me, is that the latest one over here?
Well, we believe the original boundaries can be delineated, which we believe is roughly 10 acres of which...
So I'm trying to understand, where do those 10 acres lie currently in comparison to the area you have in your hand?
This is the boundary which we believe delineates the original camp, which we estimate to be about 10 acres. In 1967, a road was constructed which bisected the property, and 3 acres sort of came off and have been developed over time, leaving a balance of, I believe, about 7 acres. And within the 7 acres, about 3 to 4. Clearly, these buildings have been demolished, but we are saying that a small portion, maybe about 1.5 acres of an oak grove, which you can see is here and here, still remains, and that portion will be set aside where appropriate commemorative improvements could be made. So the request is designate within the original boundaries of the camp facility, which today is about 7 acres. It's about 1.5 acres, which still has over 100-year-old oaks, which we argue is the nexus to the original historical events and will be an appropriate place to install commemorative improvements so that we're not impeding future redevelopment. If a future owner or developer chooses to redevelop through that process, that a set-aside would be requested for the appropriate commemoration.
Okay, thank you. That clarified that. Okay.
Just a special request. There's a constituent here whose father and uncle were incarcerated at the camp, Haru Kuromiya. I don't know, did you fill out a card? But we were hoping to ask if she could.
That's fine.
Yeah,
They'd like to speak first because I was going to go through the order of the cards, but if they'd like to come on up, they're more than welcome. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. My name is Haru.
Can you bring the microphone down? There you go.
My name is Haru Kuromiya. I live at 3588 Canyon Crest Road in Altadena. I'm here to speak for my father, Chikayatsu Inaba, and his brother, Hideo Inaba. Before World War II, my parents were farmers and my uncle was a dentist. I was a sophomore in high school. When Pearl Harbor was bombed, our lives were turned upside down. The FBI picked up my father and uncle in February 1942. They were first taken to the local jail, then to the Tuhunga Canyon camp. I vaguely remember visiting them once. We were not allowed inside the camp. We had to talk to them through the barbed wire fence that surrounded the camp. From Tuhunga, they were sent to Santa Fe, New Mexico, then Lordsburg, New Mexico, and finally to Crystal City, Texas. After 15 months, we joined them in a family camp there. I felt sorry for my mother. Shortly after the FBI abducted my father, my mother gave birth to my youngest brother. She was left to raise 7 children with the help of relatives and friends. She coped the best she could. The authorities would not let my father be with her at this difficult time. My mother and aunts settled their affairs, left Riverside, and evacuated to live in Manzanar. It's in California. It's a so-called relocation center until we could join our father in Crystal City. My father and uncle were first-generation Japanese Americans and had adapted really well to life in the United States. They cared very deeply about being Americans. My father's dream was to build up a farm with his sons. My uncle was a successful dentist with a wife and 3 boys. They never once considered going back to Japan, even though the U.S. government incarcerated them and their families for no legitimate reason. Our families did not leave the Crystal City concentration camp until January 1946, after almost 4 years in camp. Today, I ask for your leadership in granting historical cultural monument status for Tuna Canyon Detention Station. This site has tremendous historical significance. It will serve as a reminder of the importance of our constitutional rights and of how easily these rights can be taken away. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kuromiya. Is there another speaker, Mr. Kumitan? Okay. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is James M. Okazaki.
James Okazaki. I live at 2814 Carleras Road in San Marino. As you know, I'm a former city employee for 34 years, and nice to see you, gentlemen. Under a different circumstance, I just kind of want to technically handle the site issue. As CD7 indicated, there's about 10 acres of site we believe was the original campsite. When Las Tunas Canyon and the 210 freeway was built, that original campsite was divided. So 3 acres was lost. So there's roughly 7 acres of the old campsite physically there. Now, I heard that 1.5 acre of the oak grove should be saved and preserved for interpretive purposes. But I like to say that I think we need an additional acre because there needs to be an access to that area. So I think we need an area of about 2.5 acres adjacent to Las Tunas Canyon and Tahunga Canyon Road. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Again, I'd just like to invite you to keep an eye on the clock when you come up so that we can get to your point. I appreciate your cooperation. Bill Watanabe. Mr. Watanabe, come on up. Good afternoon, sir.
Hi. Bill Watanabe, 2279 Glendale Boulevard, Los Angeles. I'm a member of the Asian Pacific Islander National Historic Preservation Forum and also the Little Tokyo Historical Society. And my main point is that historical resources have to be protected wherever we find them. Now, I understand that there has to be something like integrity or a sense of what the place was like, but this is not like an inviolable rule. It's not one of the 10 commandments. It's just a rule that we have to go by, but there are exceptions. In Little Tokyo, we have what's called the Awayama tree. It's a tree that was planted almost a century ago by a Buddhist minister in Little Tokyo, and it's historic cultural monument number 920 in the city of Los Angeles. And so here we have at Tuna Canyon a whole grove of trees that could be designated. So I'd like to push for your support for inclusion of this site as a historic cultural monument.
Thank you, sir. Nancy Kayoko Oda. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Nancy Kyoko Oda. I live in Van Nuys, 5825 Ranchito Avenue. Good afternoon, and it is a pleasure to be here. I am the president of the San Fernando Valley Japanese American Community Center, and I was born in Tule Lake, California, a segregation center. This particular request that we are asking is very important to us to establish the cultural historical monument. I believe that this discovery was not accidental. It was meant to be that the beautiful trees would still remain, and that the topography of the location would stir a lot of emotions. It was said that there are no structures left. Ernie Nishi responded by saying, "Buildings fall, places endure." It is in the historical context where we, the first Japanese, were picked up after Pearl Harbor were interred. So now when we come to Tuna Canyon, it is with new eyes. We can walk to the remaining grove and capture the suffering felt by more than 1,400 Japanese in 1941 in our soul.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Munson Kwok.
Afternoon. Councilpersons, my name is Munson Kwok. I'm representing today the Chinese American Citizens Alliance National Civil Rights Group located 415 Bamboo Lane. I address the Tuna Canyon Detention Station matter involving the standpoint of civil rights. It is essential to consider it as a cultural historical monument because it will create an important teaching moment for all the people of California. The Tuna Canyon Station is an example of things we should not or cannot do within the law. It violated the civil rights of Japanese Americans as a group, selecting only them as an ethnic group for internment proceedings. This is unequal discriminatory treatment before the U.S. Constitution. The teaching moment is, we may do things we should not. We must acknowledge them and understand them. And we must teach others never to let it happen again. There are few, if any, sites in our city where such an instruction is so vividly set forth for all Americans. I have to defer with Mr. Bernstein. It must start with designation. I urge you to support designation for Tuna Canyon. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Alan Kumamoto.
Good afternoon. My name's Alan Kumamoto. Live at 4130 Seaview Lane in Los Angeles. I'm a third-generation Angelino, so that means my grandparents came from Japan, but my parents and myself were born here. And there's nothing of historic significance, such as this particular location in the area. And I think it's important that the city of Los Angeles recognize this place. It has a difference from some of the other concentration camps that are scattered around the country, because this one took single head of households and took them and separated them from their families. And I think that needs to be recognized through the grove of trees. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. W. Lloyd Hitt. Good afternoon.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Lloyd Hitt, 10738 Plateau Drive, Sunland, California. As a local historian, let me say, we know the correct Tunic detention location. I'm sorry, but as my friend Ken Bernstein, he's not quite in the right place. When it opened and closed, we know the prisoners by name, what concentration camp they were shipped to, the name of the staff. We recognize the stands of old oaks cradled by the Verdugo Hills from a 1952 aerial photograph. What we do not know is what lays under the topsoil. In looking at previous sites, when the Cultural Heritage Commission often created monuments about people and major historical events, but today are no longer there except for a historic marker, we have to wonder, are not the actions of our government against over 100,000 people based on race just as important as an old house down the street? Nationally, we have battlefield monuments, and there's no cannons there, there's nothing there.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a good run. Got 2 more pages to go. Okay. But we will read the material. David Scott.
My name is David Scott. I live at 1042 North Mountain Avenue, B254 in Upland, California. I stand here as the grandson of the officer in charge, and to let you know, as the family representative, we support this in full with all of our heart and soul. This place needs to be remembered so that atrocities like this are not repeated. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Priscilla Ochida, then followed by Nancy Takayama.
Priscilla Ochida, Japanese American Citizens League, 1629 K Street Northwest, Washington, D.C. The Japanese American Citizens League conducts teacher training programs that cover supplementary curriculum for history and cover constitutional and due process. Those programs are connected to confinement sites to allow students to learn the lessons of World War II. This is a unique opportunity because it's located in a populated urban area, unlike most of the confinement sites that are in very desolate areas, and very few students get to take advantage of those. But here we have an opportunity to provide thousands of students with the lessons of World War II. Thank you.
Wow, that was under 1 minute. That was great. Good afternoon.
Hi, my name is Nancy Takayama. I'm with 441 Kewen Avenue in Pacoima. I received a California State Library grant to document the existence of the Japanese and Japanese American farmers in the San Fernando Valley. I worked with the students of the Asian American Studies Department at the California State University at Northridge. We uncovered that there were 132 produce and flower farmers pre-war in the San Fernando Valley. This would have been forgotten and lost history. You will find little or no records in the public and city records. It is through those oral histories and grants that that allowed us to continue to add to our incomplete U.S. history. The Tuna Canyon Station operated as a gateway and internment for civilians of Japanese, Peruvians, Italians, and Germans descent. The detention center station is part of our forgotten and lost history. This detention center and the stories that go with it are an integral part of U.S. history from 70 years ago. Please support it. We need, this is part of our American history.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Stephanie Nitahara, then Kei Ochi, then Kathy Masaoko.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Nitahara, and I'm the Regional Director for the local Japanese American Citizens League located at 250 East 1st Street in Los Angeles. The only thing I really want to add is that I'm troubled by the decision to not designate this as a historic landmark based on the fact that it was built over, because it condones the building over of historic sites and different stories of our people to cover potentially a negative blip in American history. This can result in the strategic loss of our history, and I want to maintain these stories for my generation, who's becoming more and more distanced from its past, and for the future generations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Keochi, then Kathy Masaoka.
Good afternoon. Kei Ochi, 255 Los Flores Drive, Chula Vista, California. That's in San Diego County. A former Echo Park resident of about 25 years. What would compel me to come up to see you today? It is my passion to urge you to support the Historic Cultural Monument designation. As a third-generation Japanese American, my mom and dad were in Poston, Arizona for over 3 years in America's concentration camp. I also wanted to share that this year, 2013 marks the 25th anniversary of the signing of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. Ronald Reagan signed this historic legislation to really apologize to the Japanese Americans who were incarcerated and also to grant token reparations. At this time, the 25th anniversary, it would be such an opportunity for Los Angeles City Council to step up and join all of the community here and across the nation in recognizing this historic tragedy and supporting this designation. We urge you, we compel you to do the right thing at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Kathy Masaoka, 3060 St. George Street, Los Angeles. I am actually representing the Nikkei for Civil Rights and Redress, but speaking on behalf of Shakil Syed of the Southern California Shura Council, and I just want to read a brief part of his statement. On behalf of more than 75 member mosques of the Islamic Shura Council, serving more than 500,000 Muslims in Southern California, I'd like to record our profound support in preserving the Tuna Canyon as a historic cultural monument. We can better plan our future only if we make sure we remember our past. In the Tuna Canyon lies sacred memories of a generation, and that which is sacred must be respected and not razed. I ask you to protect and preserve the Tuna Canyon because in it we will always find our moral compass for the future. This is from Shakil Syed, Executive Director of the Shura Council, and I also have a letter from the Executive Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, Hassam Al-Yush, which I'd like to submit.
Please. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
I'm wondering if Salam Al-Mariyati might follow me.
Yes, I was about to call him next. Come on up. Good afternoon.
Good morning, Councilman. Salam Al-Mariyati. Our office is in your district, Councilman, and also I live 10311 McBroom Street in Sunland.
Yes, good to see you.
You know, we lose democracy in two ways. By losing to an opponent externally and by letting it slip internally. And we see so many memorials in parks dedicating our commemoration to those who fought for our democracy. but we do not have memorials in the city of Los Angeles that remind us of how democracy can slip away from our hands. It's not in faraway places like Crystal City and Manzanar that only a few people know about, but it's in places like Tuna Canyon where we have to learn the lesson where democracy can slip away. And we are standing on the shoulders of Japanese Americans today to preserve our freedoms. And that's why we support the preservation of this monument. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Michelle Magalang, Rosalind Sagara, and Paul G. Perez. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Michelle Magalang, 2369 Orchard Lane in Corona. I'm speaking on behalf of the Asian and Pacific Islander Americans in Historic Preservation, as I'm the steering committee chair. We disagree with the Cultural Heritage Commission's finding. We believe that this determination is narrow in scope and further detailed study of the site is needed to confirm the integrity. The National Park Service is recommending that the evaluation of key sites associated with Japanese American confinement during World War II be considerate of their temporary nature and at the war's conclusion, the government's drive to quickly close the centers and return the land to its original stewards or convey it to new owners. Further, we argue that Tuna Canyon Detention Facility retains strong integrity of location and setting. While there are no buildings of this period remains, mature oaks are still present from the period of significance.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Rosalind Zagara, 15422 Tippin Court, Moreno Valley. I'm here to deliver a copy of several signatures that we've been collecting online. As you can see, the room is full of people who want to see the site designated. We're wearing red. Many of us here today have very personal reasons why we want this site designated. My father is a Japanese American who was interned in Tule Lake, and so this is a very important site for me. And I just want to let you know that we have over 1,200 signatures. Obviously, there's this room is full, and there's a lot more of us who want to see this site designated. Thank you.
And you're all wearing red shirts, so that's great. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for allowing me to address you, gentlemen. My name is Paul Perez, or Perez. I live at 2360 Westcott, City of Monterey Park. I happen to be the current president of the Asian Pacific State Employees Association, known as APSE. We're here to ask for your support to designate the Verdugo Hills Golf Course into a worthy, historic, and much respected city cultural monument for the Tuna Canyon Detention Center, or station. This will help our youth recognize, respect, and learn from what took place in the history of the United States. The monument will help tell that painful and shameful story. Where there's worthy monuments to help youth take pride, and this is what the monuments are good for, to help our youth take pride in who they are. Where there's pride, crime goes down, and we all benefit. Although there's no sites, there's no construction there, it's a site that counts. I'd like to quote an old Chinese general who once said, "He who ignores history is doomed to make the same mistakes." Please support the designation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Mary Benson, Nancy Woodruff, Bill Skiles. I'd like to come on up. You're more than welcome. Mary Benson, Nancy Woodruff, and Bill Skiles.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Mary Benson, and my activism in preserving and helping open space in the Tujunga Wash and Verdugo Mountains began in 2000. I was working at that time with the Army Corps that was searching for a 10-acre internment site, something to do with tuna, something to do with Tujunga. It appeared the site had been lost. In August of 2012, the fiscal year 2013 grant program guidelines for the Japanese American Confinement Sites grant program were released. For the first time, Tuna Canyon Camp was among the listed sites. Based on that, learning of this grant opportunity that would fund comprehensive research about the camp, I financed a trip to Washington, D.C. That trip was specifically to call on staff of the Asian Pacific Caucus most familiar with the grant. The staff
for Foothill Trails District Neighborhood Council, as well as the Tuna Canyon Community Association. At the February 21st, 2013 General Board meeting of the FTDNC, we voted 8-0 to support the Council Motion 12-1625 because La Tuna Camp, the detention station, should be designated as a city historical cultural monument to remind us of past atrocities during the chaotic period of World War II. Under the designation, stakeholders can learn about the history of Tuna Camp as well as the contributions it made to the area during the Depression era. For some reason, the CIS didn't seem to make it into the system, and I'd like to submit it now.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Bill Skiles, Bonnie Rodiger-Levine, Lawrence Pfefferman.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Skiles. I'm a resident of Sunland. I've lived in Sunland, Tehunga since 1948. I've been hearing stories about the Tuna Camp my whole life. We have a ghost at Tuna Camp that our community is asking you to put to rest. We also have an example in our sister city, Berlin, Germany, of how one city with many ghosts has memorialized the mistakes of their past. Today, you may find reminders on just about every street in Berlin noting the names of Germans sent to their camps. We're not asking for anything on that scale. We're asking only that recognition by the city be made, memorializing what happened at Tuna Camp between December 1941 and October 1943. If the Berliners can remember the victims of their past, then so can we. Please consider the moral obligation we have to remember this site.
Thank you, sir. Bonnie Rodiger-Levine, Lawrence Pfefferman, and Wayne Healy. Good afternoon.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Rodiger-Levine, a resident of Tehunga, educator with Masters in Humanities and a PhD in Cultural Anthropology from Sofia University, Bulgaria, raising 6 kids aging 26 years to 7 months in Tehunga. I came back from Manzanar a week ago. That's my 4th time in 10 years. Took a professor in history from Canada, none of us from Japanese descent, but both recognizing the value of memorials like that, so we remember, so we never repeat the mistakes of the past. How many people drive by Manzanar and how many people drive by Tehunga Canyon every day? I do that twice a day at least. I believe that this site is extremely valuable, not because the buildings are there or not there or some remainings of foundation is left, but just as a place we can actually recognize what happened and teach the new generation not to repeat the same mistakes. I need to throw one more piece of information which is not related to 20th century. This was also the last site of Native Americans living in Tehunga, forcefully removed. So
thank you, ma'am.
Atrocities have been done to more than one group of people, and we can
teach
the young people about
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you.
Lawrence?
Yes, my name is Lawrence Pfefferman. One of the reasons why I'm in favor of historical designations is that I happen to live in a National Historic Landmark, the Village Green. So I'm in favor of this designation. I think the reasoning of the Commission was wrong. The city has designated places where there have never been any structures at all, like the Eagle Rock and Stony Point outcroppings, which are just natural rock formations. Now, I don't know if it's really necessary to set aside land. Might be sufficient just to have nice big monuments and markers, signs, and maybe a museum at Tuna Canyon.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Wayne Healy, Janek Dombrawa, and Mark Stuttermans. Good day, sir.
Good afternoon. My name's Wayne Healy. I live at 3912 Bernice Avenue in Lincoln Heights. Half a century ago, I was a high school student in East LA. At that time, a sizable portion of the student body, the school I went to was Japanese American, mostly Sansei, and several of them lived in Mount Sanar. I always heard that word Mount Sanar. It sounded so romantic. Fast forward 3-4 decades, and now I'm cruising down I-395 with Mrs. Healy and saw a signpost, Mount Sanar historic spot. Out of curiosity, I wanted to see that place. I was unprepared for the emotional atmosphere that overwhelmed both of us as we toured the grounds. That same sense of reflective and contemplative feeling would be generated by the Tuna Canyon detention station. And I strongly urge support for that designation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you for your work.
Good afternoon. I'm Janek Dombrova. I'm the architect for the site. When we were asked to redesign this project on the site in 2011, one of the first things we did was preserve the oak trees. So the oak grove that's under discussion is being preserved in the current project. The developer was prepared then to mark the site within the oak trees with a commemorative plaque, and is now prepared to mark the site on Tuna or La Tuna, on Tahunga. A much larger site in Arcadia is marked with a plaque, and we would like to work with the community, particularly the people who suffered or have memories of suffering, and prepare appropriate language, make sure that all the memories are preserved, whether they're Native Americans or Japanese or parents of guards or other people who participated in the site. Thank you.
Okay. And I didn't mean to confuse the audience, but that is the architect for the developer speaking for the project. It slipped into the wrong stack. So I apologize for that. Just so that no one gets confused. Okay. Mark Sturdivant, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Sturdivant, Chairman of the Board of Glendale Crescenta Voice. Our address is Post Office Box 273, Montrose, California. We're a nonprofit organization with over 5,000 members, donors, and supporters, many of whom live in the Sunland, Tahunga, Shadow Hills, and La Tuna Canyon neighborhoods of Los Angeles. And we're here today in support of the Japanese, German, and Italian American communities who wish to see Tuna Canyon Detention Station designated as a historic cultural monument. Now, why is this designation necessary? The answer is simple. Designation is the only way to ensure that this important lesson in our history, the imprisonment of more than 2,000 Los Angeles residents, is acknowledged, remembered, and interpreted for future generations. Designation is the only way to ensure permanent recognition of Tuna Canyon. If you deny historic cultural status to Tuna Canyon, you are essentially saying to the people who live this history, and I will conclude, whose parents and grandparents lived this history, that your history is not important enough. It doesn't matter.
Thank you very
much. This Tuna Canyon does matter. Please don't let it be forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Joanne Kumamoto, and then Charles Fisher. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Joanne Kumamoto. I live at 4130 Seaview Lane, Los Angeles. I was going to read this. This is a personal history from a journal from Ashiro Fujioka, who was interned at Tuna Canyon, but I'll give it to you.
Okay.
But I did want to say that at the beginning of World War II, the Japanese community completely stopped here in Los Angeles. All the leaders were taken out away from the community, and separated from their families. As part of that, my father was one of those. He was taken, and the family was not able to reach him for several weeks because they didn't know what happened to him. He ended up being sent to Missoula, Montana, where many of the interns from Tuna Canyon went. And these are the personal stories I think we need to preserve. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Charles Fisher, then David Barron.
Good afternoon, Charlie Fisher, 140 South Avenue 57 in Highland Park. I want to speak about the designation process and the eligibility issue. We talk about the fact that there's nothing left of this site. This is a precedent in Los Angeles for declaring sites that are just like this. I want to mention 4 in particular: the Chatsworth Reservoir Kiln site, Tim's Landing in San Diego, Shananga out on Lincoln Boulevard, and the last one being the Walt Disney Studio site in Silver Lake. These were all designated when not a single remnant existed of the original property. There is precedent for it. I actually did an augmentation on the Disney site in 2006 to include the site of the Animator School, which was across the street from the original site, which today is a Gelson's Market. It's very important that this designation will not stop development. What it will do is recognize permanently the fact that this is an important part of our history. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Mr. Barron?
David Barron, 10-11-0, Samoa, Sunland, Tahanga. Every week in City Council chambers, we honor our residents for deeds and events. That's the room next door. Today, we as a civilized society and as human beings after the fact should at least honor these detainees with a simple monument designation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I believe it's Nina Royale. Nina Royal. There you go.
Good afternoon. My name is Nina Royal. I'm Treasurer and Land Use Committee member of the Sunland Tahanga Neighborhood Council, and I am in support of saving this monument, or putting in the monument for the Verdugo Hills Golf Course. I'm Italian, and my family comes from Italy, and I cannot tell you the embarrassment and disgrace that we felt, even me as a young person here in California, of the shame that we felt for World War II. But also people need to know that things were done to the Germans, the Italians, and the Japanese as well that should not have happened, because they were Americans, and even if they weren't actual Americans, they were most likely here legally, like my family. And we were, how should I put it, that with disdain. And this is a way that can remedy that we can be proud of our heritage. And thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, Robert Horsting. Robert Horsting.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Robert Horsting. I live at 709 Glendale, Burchett Street in Glendale. And I'm an oral historian and documentary filmmaker, and I've had the privilege as a volunteer with the Go for Broke National Education Center, their Hanashi Oral History program, to hear many of these stories of Japanese American World War II veterans firsthand. It's been a real honor, and many of them have told me that their fathers have been held at this tuna camp. And on that basis, I ask you to really seriously consider supporting this effort, because it is our history, it's their history, and these people fought and in many cases died for their country, knowing their fathers were in these detention camps. Among them, Ted Tunaway, Tech Sergeant Ted Tunaway, a Medal of Honor recipient, and the only one from the city of Torrance, was inducted on February 20th, 1942, one day before, after 9066, the executive order that sentenced all these people to camps, was
Thank
issued.
You, sir.
And on the 21st, his father was arrested and then brought to tuna camp.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. This has a note, says to place on file, do not need to speak. That's Mr. Michael Jones. I'll do that. Now we will go to the opposing side. It's Fred Gaines and Lara Carias. And you already heard from the architect. Mr. Gaines.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that after almost an hour of testimony on the one side that we be allowed, there's just 2 speakers, 10 minutes total.
You should have brought a whole room full of people. I was just kidding. Okay, we'll give you... Do you need the 10 minutes?
Probably not, but between the two of us, if we could have 3 minutes apiece. Or
sure, I'll give you
like
more
that,
time.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Honorable Councilman Englander. We are here on behalf of the property owner. Let's be clear as to what's in dispute. There is certainly no dispute about the historical activities that occurred at this site, and there's no dispute that it should be memorialized. What is in dispute is the legal and proper way to do that. There is a project pending on the site, a housing project, 224 moderately priced workforce housing units, and there's an EIR that's been a draft that went out in 2008 that has been circulated that includes an analysis. In fact, most of the materials that you have in front of you regarding the historic nature of the site were developed at the expense of the property owner as part of the EIR with a mitigation that includes that there would be an appropriate memorial commemorative on this site. What happened very recently, years after this process has started, was that there was a council-initiated application. So that process went forward. Your department did their analysis following the city guidelines. They went and did a site visit. The entire commission came out and did a site visit. And then they were unanimous, both the staff and the commission, that it doesn't meet the criteria for the city designation. All of the buildings and physical improvements associated were demolished in 1960 for the construction of the golf course. The site was graded almost completely. The findings were made by your commission that there are no remaining aesthetics, architectural, or engineering interest or value of the former use on the site. The commission went on to say that they felt that it was important that this process not be used by the city council or others as a tool to prevent or delay development. And that they felt in this case, in fact, it was being abused for the purpose of delaying or preventing the pending development application. They were also not happy with the fact that neither CD7 nor any of the community representatives had contacted the developer regarding, or the property owner regarding, and in fact they have refused to meet with the developer, and I'll provide some documentation about our attempts to meet with the council to discuss this. Because if we could discuss it, I think we would reach agreement. Because what the oak trees that are now being raised today, pretty much for the first time, are preserved in the site plan for the site. That's the exact location where the commemorative is planning to be. So we're even that close to having agreement as to the location, the preservation of oak trees. We're happy to have the community participate in what the memorial actually turns out to be. But what is important is that the city designation has particular criteria and particular ramifications. The ramifications of the city designation are that you can't demolish without certain criteria going through. You can't alter structures. And that's why, in this case, it's not appropriate, because there's nothing there to demolish, there's nothing there to alter. As part of the property owner has already, as a result of the full historic survey that was done as the IR, made application to the state for a California historical landmark, because that, in this case, is the appropriate designation. It's appropriate designation when you have this kind of situation on the site. And then under CEQA, as the project goes through, you create a mitigation which includes this. So all that your staff is telling you and that your commission is telling you is follow the law and do the appropriate process for the commemoration of the activities on this site. And that's what we would ask for you to do today. Look, the cause is just. There's no argument that the cause that the people are here for today, to have this be commemorated, is just. And the result will be achieved. There will be a commemoration on this site, and in fact, from what I hear today, it'll even be in the location that people want it to be in terms of near the oak trees and in that area. But you have to follow the law to do it, to protect everyone's rights. And the law in this case is that CEQA will end up with a mitigation, that we have a California Historic Landmark designation, but it's not qualified for the city designation.
I'm going to ask for a timeout, Mr. Young. When you hear today's testimony, and it is clear the value being placed on the experience on this site, the experience. As you said, the structures are already gone. The trees remain. In your proposal, and I'm not here to negotiate, it's a question. Is there room in your scenario that speaks to the value placed on the history of this site? Is there adequate room that gives this site the justice it deserves?
Absolutely, absolutely there is. Let me tell you what the EIR proposed mitigation is. The proposed mitigation, in addition to having the site designated through the California Historic Landmark as a thematic, in their thematic landmark group, which is the appropriate category for this type of a designation, is that to commemorate associated events through interpretation at the site, so appropriate interpretation meaning plaques or other types of artwork or other appropriate items, to encourage sensitive development of the overall landscape. And so what we've done to do that is this grove of oak trees, which are in the middle, are completely being preserved, and we're suggesting that that be the location of the memorial on this whole 36-acre site. It's going to be where, interestingly today, almost for the first time, it's being pinpointed, but we had already done that, come to that in the site plan, and to accommodate visitors through ease of parking, observation, and meditation. So we have adapted so that there is access. Someone had raised access. It's going to be right at the main access, that there is parking at that site, and that there's the ability to sit and meditate and be involved in that. So that's exactly what is happening through the appropriate process, which is a CEQA process.
Okay, I'm on the edge here because the project itself is not the agenda, it's the designation. Right. So I have to be careful how I approach this.
I think just a moment. And I'm going to,
this is going to be a little awkward, so bear with me. Just by a show of hands, how many folks in the audience are aware of the details that led to this designation in terms of the nature of the project? Like, for example, the trees being preserved, the monument, the plaques. Are people in the audience aware of this? If you're not, if you are, just raise your hands. I'm just curious. If you are familiar with the description of what's being presented. Okay, that's all I need to know. Okay.
And what I was going to say is we're happy to meet and discuss that with anyone who'd like to do that.
Okay, well, we'll hold off there. So, are you done, Mr. Gaines? Do you have a question for Mr. Gaines? Please. In general, but for him. Okay. Thank you, sir.
The only other point I want to make is, you've heard your expert reports that go through the details of the findings. I thought you said...
Do you want to finish? Is it... Because I know you can keep going, but...
The last point here's the last point. I heard today a lot of different ideas, everything from 10 acres to 1 acre to 4 acres. If there was going to be a designation, it at least has to be defined. in an appropriate way. And that has not been done. That was my point, is that if we're going to do this, and we oppose it, but then it has to be specific, and we still have work to do.
I got you. Okay.
Thank you.
That was very clear. Thank you,
The
sir.
only other witnesses are historic experts.
I do have Laura Carillas.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Laura Carillas, and I'm an architectural historian with SWCA in Pasadena. Our firm completed the EIR and the Cultural Resources Technical Report that came with it, and I meet the Secretary of the Interior Professional Qualification Standards for Architectural History. I reviewed the draft EIR report that was written, and I reviewed the staff recommendation report written by the LA City Department of Planning, as well as the definition of a monument as quoted in the Cultural Heritage Ordinance. And I can only repeat what the Office of Historic Resources has stated, and as what Mr. Gaines has said. The site has lost integrity. Of course, everyone is saying the buildings are gone. The buildings are gone. We know that. We have the grading of the landscape to the west. We have a major street and the 210 freeway that were put in to the south, and that alters the landscape and the feeling and association that goes with the La Tuna Canyon area. And so therefore I agree that the site isn't eligible as a historic cultural monument.
I appreciate the analysis based on the facts, but I think if you were responding to the spirit, a sense of urgency, a sense of value that occurred here, there's a different dialogue going on. But I appreciate the facts as you stated them. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And quickly, I just want to add that, and again, Mr. Gaines mentioned this, but I do want to reiterate that one of the mitigation measures that was presented in the draft EIR is making this site a California historical landmark, and that itself, again, I heard a lot of people say that they want plaques. This designation would include an official plaque, and then coordination with Caltrans, they could also get a sign put up on the highway, directing traffic to the site. So I just want to make sure I add that.
I'm sensing a gap where, although the state historic process has its role, what the gap I sense is that what could and should be preserved, to me, is very gray. I think what you stated, based on the physical elements that are today, versus what could be captured, celebrated, amplified, to me is a gray area. And therein lies, in my mind, a gap. Based on the raise of hands, I'm not certain if the folks here are familiar enough with the detail to know what is acceptable and what isn't, based on the value that's being placed on the experience. And there, for me, is what I'm struggling with. But I appreciate, again, your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Gubata.
May I make a few comments, if I may?
Please.
Please. Thank you. Gerald Gubatow, Councilman Alarcon. Just a few comments. The owner's rep has characterized this motion as a cynical ploy to impede development, and the council member would take exception to that characterization. He truly believes, once he learned about the history, it's really about acknowledgement. Just another comment, the draft EIR reference, which is not before the City Council, it certainly can be changed. It's not accepted. It's not certified. He did make reference to a consultant report mitigation measure for state designation. We checked the state office, Historic Preservation Office, and no formal filing of a listing has occurred. So bottom line, it's all about acknowledgement. The new information, we would say, since the commission is its photographic evidence from 1950, where we can now clearly delineate the boundaries of the original acre camp, and within that, a smaller portion of natural features remain, which we would ask for a set-aside.
So is it, and being careful on the advice of the city attorney, because what's in front of us is a historic designation, not the project itself. But with this new evidence since the commission, could it be suggested that there is room for understanding how and where we can memorialize the experience here, that there is room for achieving both goals?
Yes, I'm saying we know the 7 acres of the original camp, of which a smaller portion, roughly an acre and a half or 2, has the oak groves. That would be an appropriate set-aside of space to install appropriate commemorative type of improvements.
Okay. So I'm speaking in generalities right now. Okay, thank you. Okay. I know I'm getting pretty close there, aren't I? Okay. All right. Councilman Englander, any thoughts, any questions that you might have for staff?
Thank you. Yes, a few. In reviewing the information from the Cultural Heritage Commission and their staff, first of all, let me just say that I actually think they do a very good job, and they do a good service for the most part. They really do their due diligence. They go out on sites, they do a lot of research, and they try to protect sensitive areas and historical significance to their best of their ability within the framework they have to work in. And I often see and want to compliment, because I know there were some other words said earlier about Ken Bernstein and his work, is just phenomenal in how he typically represents the city and projects, and want to acknowledge his staff and everything they've done. There's no question in my mind that this is an area of historical significance. There's no doubt. And not just by the show of all of you in support of this, but some of these extraordinary historical photos. I don't even know if all of you have had the opportunity to see this. Have you all seen this in the room? This is incredible that some of these, this was captured and is now on record with these photos and what occurred here, and some of the stories that were shared here as well. And so I want to compliment not only Cultural Heritage for their due diligence in trying to figure this out from their perspective, but the community as well as, by the way, the landowner as well. Because I think from what I've heard through a lot of the dialogue and concern and conversation is everybody identifies this area as very sensitive, that something has to be done. And it sounds like there's just a disconnect between what that is and who's doing it and where it's taking place. That sounds like where we're at today. I do have some questions about, perhaps I can ask of staff. Actually, if I could, Ken, if you could come up, please. So I think there's an opportunity to capture and protect and preserve everybody's interest in this, which I think is incredibly important. First of all, is approving or denying this application in whole or in part time sensitive today that we act? Is a clock ticking before us to do so?
Again, Ken Bernstein, Department of City Planning. I'll have to defer to the city clerk on the last day to act. There is a time limit for the council's action, but I don't have that in front of me.
The time limit for council to act is July 17th. However, with the pending council recess, the last day for council to act on this request is Wednesday, July 3rd.
It's Wednesday, July 3rd. And let me ask you this. Who would it be up to then to extend that time period? Is there an individual, or is there a group? Is it the appellant, perhaps, as the property owner? Or is it just a time period because it's an issue of acting against the direction or the recommendation of the commission?
Under the Cultural Heritage Ordinance, the council has 90 days to act from the date of the commission action, with a possible 15-day extension. I'm not clear if the July 3rd date already encompasses that additional 15 days. I have to go back and look at the date of commission action. I believe it does. The commission date was April 18th, and just doing the math in my head, let's see.
And just for a point of clarification,
I think actually there would be an additional 15 days.
So there's an additional 15 days on top of the July 17th date?
Yes, council member. With the additional 15, the initial July 17th calculation was based on 90 days from the meeting of the Cultural Heritage Commission. So with the additional 15 days, that would bring the time limit to August 1st, which is a Thursday. So therefore, the last day for council to act is Wednesday, July 31st. So while the council will return from recess on July 23rd, there would be 5 council meetings for the council to act.
Okay, but meanwhile, a lot of things can happen while that time is that clock is running. I didn't even realize there was a clock on this. Okay, thank you very much. That helps for that. I've got some other questions as well. And not relative to the clock. One thing I never understood is anytime we ask for the time period back, if council's not meeting or if there's a recess or something occurring or a holiday, it works the clock backwards. Yet with every other governmental time period, it moves it forward. In other words, if your taxes are due on April 15th and April 15th falls on a Saturday or a holiday or whatever the case may be, you have a couple extra days. It doesn't. Anyway, that's another issue. Welcome to the LA.
Where are you taking us?
I don't know where that happens. I don't know why that happens. It just we always bump it backwards. Okay, so and does this designation then, is it a permanent designation if we were to approve it? Does it run with the land? Does it change with the owner? How does that work?
It is permanent. It does run with the land, so it would be in place in perpetuity unless the council took a subsequent action to actually delist the property, which is a significant step with a number of consequences in its own right. So it is permanent. Okay.
Now, this appears to be happening without conversation, dialogue, or in concert with the owner. Is that often the case in one of these designations?
No. Our process always involves notification of the owner, the opportunity for the owner to participate, at least in the public process. In terms of the level of involvement, obviously that varies from property to property. The majority of nominations, in fact, are put forward by owners themselves.
I mean, I find it rather interesting, and I will use the word suspicious that it's happening without dialogue of the interested parties here that are spending all the time coming here to testify and work and protect and preserve this without that conversation when the owner's representatives are very interested in coming up with some type of designation in concert with the community. I find that fascinating. How many times has the council acted and actually scratched that? I'm going to ask for some report backs because I want to make sure, and I've got a recommendation as well. But on one of the report backs, I'd like to see how often the council has ever acted initiating a historical designation by council action, not having the findings and commission denying it, and in this case I believe it was a unanimous vote, and then went ahead and overrode the commission without the consent of the property owner. In other words, I'm trying to find out if this is such a unique case that's actually even happened ever in the history of the city. And I think it's really important because it goes to my next question that I'd like a report back on as well. Another report back I'd like to know from a city attorney opinion on do we have any vulnerabilities legally if we were to do that, that we're overturning the Commission's objectives and staff report, and could this be considered any kinds of takings lawsuit, or is it wrapped up in any way, even though we're not allowed to speak to that issue, that there's a proposed project on site, that this is trying to usurp that process? And I think we need a legal opinion on that, because no good deed goes unpunished. And what happens then is I don't want to turn around and find we all lose. I don't want to turn around and find out that the good people that are here today that have been working so hard that we go ahead and pass this. If we did that and we're turned around and we're sued, because we live in a very litigious society, the representative that was before us on the property owner is himself an attorney. We would probably be sued. And if that's the case, I think it's important to figure out that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, that we don't sit here and act because we feel it's critically important, which I believe it is. I think this is a sensitive area that should be protected. But if we move forward and do that against the Commission's finding, against the Commission's vote, and we lose a lawsuit, if that were to happen, and the owner says, well, now I don't have to do anything. I won. I have not only a judicial decision, but you have no legislative action to stop me to do anything. I don't have to erect a monument. I don't have to protect and preserve areas that I said I would do that are sensitive. And they stated they are willing. In fact, they have stated they have a plan to do that, and most of the people here in the room haven't even seen that plan. So I think there's an opportunity here where we need to get people together to start that conversation. So I think it's important for us and this is not a committee of the Cultural Heritage Commission. This is PLUM. This is the Planning and Land Use Management Committee of the City Council, only looking at, in a small framework, in a vacuum. In fact, we're not even allowed to discuss anything else that's proposed on this site because it's not agendized as such at this meeting. We're only look at this from one perspective only, and if that opens us up to litigation, I would hate to see that all of this work and then we lost everything, and where there's an opportunity to perhaps move forward, and there seems to be some time. So with that, I would also then recommend. I had a lot of questions on the development, but I guess I can't ask those. Is that correct? On the proposed.
Correct. The development is not on the agenda today.
So if there's a way to establish a working group, and what I was going to ask Mr. Bernstein, since you've been through this and you've got a lot of history in establishing and creating cultural monuments, and you know the ins and outs of what that means and designations, and a lot of these folks that you've worked with as well, is if there could be a working group that could report back to this committee prior to the July 31st date, so we have time to get it to council, if need be, with the owner and their representative, and if there is experts or historians from some of the Japanese communities, if there are a couple of people, would there be a couple of people willing to meet and sit down with Mr. Bernstein to officiate that and come up with some ideas on what would capture what we're looking at? And so then we can have all that come back here in a meeting and look at if there's a legal risk where we could lose it all, and I think there very well could be, and I think we've got to be careful of that, where there's a way to capture the intent of what everybody wants to do to make sure that the sacred land is in fact protected in some capacity, that there's dialogue with the owner who may or may not be willing to do something, and if you might be able to reach some conclusion to that, and to come back here and see if we're able to achieve that. So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to propose that we do that, and with your blessing.
Okay. So, in terms of sequence of events, we are suggesting that we continue this item.
Correct. Continue this item. It would give us the opportunity to bring this back. When would be the last plum meeting prior to July 31st? Could very well be a special meeting as well.
Okay, July 31st is the last day for council to act. That's a Wednesday. The first plum meeting from after the recess, well, there's the July 2nd plum meeting prior to the recess, July 23rd, first Tuesday after the recess, or July 30th, that is the last plum date before the council deadline of July 31st. So it's probably suggested, given enough time for the working group, to have plum consider this on July 23rd and possibly, if necessary, continue it to July 30th and then in council on the 31st, if that is what the committee wants to do.
I would think that would be a good recommendation, the 23rd. Then it would give us enough time, should there be a continued dialogue for continuance for the week. That would be my recommendation.
Okay. Before we go there, I'd like to ask the applicant, Mr. Gaines. I mean, the representative of the developer. Mr. Englander has proposed a time frame that, in the essence, allows for a dialogue between the planning department, yourselves, and an interested party who would be part of a working group that could address the priorities and the concerns of what we heard today. Is that something you're amenable to?
Yes.
In terms of time frames, if there is a need to provide more time, are you willing to provide that level of flexibility within reason?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Merson, I feel like I'm creating a marriage here, but do you... You got a lot of witnesses. Okay. But are you comfortable with these steps that are being...
Yes, we're happy to assist in convening a working group. I think we would certainly ask that the community representatives, since it is such a broad coalition, obviously, that amongst themselves they select representatives to engage in that process. But we're happy to assist and facilitate.
It would be my suggestion that the community get together and designate at least no more than pick five experts or leaders, because and then they don't. It's not binding, but the idea of trying to, the old saying is, a camel is a horse designed by committee. So the idea would be to see if you can come up with something that's palatable and reasonable for everyone, that then doesn't jeopardize us in a legal position to lose everything, if perhaps that's the case. But also to hear some of the plans that the applicant or the owner, if you will, in this case, the owner of the property, has actually had in mind that people haven't had the ability to hear. And then again, the idea is there's still time to come back and visit that then if there isn't an agreement reached. And in that time frame, we'll be able to get back the legal opinion as well. So I would say no more than 5.
Okay. Given that this is a very extraordinary committee, we usually don't do this. Please come on up if... Please give us your name and...
Nancy Oda, President of the San Fernando Valley Japanese American Community Center. First of all, I think your idea is very interesting. And Mr. Gaines, I understand, is not the applicant. I believe it is the people in red, the people who are here to respect and to remember our elders. I just wanted to say I'm confused because there is no dispute. They agree and we agree that this is important. So I'm confused why this would go back to a committee. So that's one question.
Okay. The points that are factual now is that given what's on the record and given statements today, that there has not been a conversation between the existing council member of the district and the owners of the property. There has not been. So this is an attempt to create understanding on what could be, given the different points of view and how to use this space. And that's the objective of the recommendation.
Today you heard the testimony of both sides, so to speak, although one side had a great number of people and one side got to speak longer. It was difficult for us to speak in complete sentences when given 1 minute.
Yes.
Unless you're an expert.
No, we could have been here all night too.
My point is that I believe that this Plum Committee has the opportunity to make a decision. You're worried about litigation to the city. There should be no litigation because this is in a way a moral issue. The Honorable Senator Daniel Inouye, who lost his arm in battle, said that physical decisions are much easier than moral decisions. And so in my opinion, this is a moral decision. That justice is not a given. It is not a present, said Deo Minami, counselor. He said it is a challenge. And so I'm challenging you to, and maybe this is going to be risky too, because I feel an urgency. I saw the respect you gave to Haru Kuramiya. I appreciate that very much. But I would like to be able to tell her that we, her community, really want to be able to say to her that we can celebrate this together.
I think given the time frames that are being proposed, that can be achieved. What we are saying today is not the end of a process, but the drilling down and looking at this opportunity for the time and value it deserves. We wholeheartedly want to be in a place where we could say to our grandchildren that we took care of our grandfathers. We need to be there. It's just that the inconsistencies in the dialogue are fairly vast. The gaps are very evident, and I believe the council member is putting forth a strategy within legal time frames to create that understanding. So this is not a defining moment in how we could celebrate our cultures and memorialize our sacrifices.
I do not want to belabor the point, but I do know that Councilman Alarcon has fought gallantly for this, and without his leadership, where does that put us?
Well, I would want to agree with you, but I don't understand the break in the dialogue.
Because he is going to be out of office, and his staff will be no longer available to us, that this coalition, the historic Tuna Canyon Detention Station Coalition, will not have the councilman's backing at that point, or is he allowed to come to speak before the council at that point?
Yes.
That's good to know.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Please come forward. This is general comment. That's why.
Pardon me, council member, may I just bring up an issue on the timing issue? The code does say that if the decision of the council will be beyond 90 days after the commission acts, that there must be an extension approved by council. So just so that you're aware, the council will have to approve an extension of 15 days, not just the Plum Committee.
Okay.
Okay, but and that can occur prior to the recess on July 3rd. Is that correct?
Yes, council member.
The reason I didn't call you, because we didn't get to general comment yet. I was going to get there.
All right.
Okay, we'll go to general comment now.
Thank you so much. My name is Mark Siegel. I'm president of the Sunland Tonga Neighborhood Council. And the reason I put in general comments is because I just want to bring up some things of what have been said. As president of the Neighborhood Council, Mr. Gaines has never in 10 years come to the Neighborhood Council and brought anything information. He's put the onus on the council office, but he has not come to the community whatsoever. The community has voted 100% unanimously to support this being done. I have an easy solution for you to take care of this today. Vote today to designate it a historical landmark site and set up the committee you said to see how to implement it in the future. That way we take care of two things. We take care of getting it done within the 90-day time limit, and the community and the council office and the developer can all work together to see how it's developed and how it's implemented. Isn't that a great solution?
Thank you. Please.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
We can't have a dialogue because of public comment, but we'll make a comment on that, and that's why I suggested moving forward within the time frame, because once there's an action and it can't be undone only by litigation, it would be my concern that if we lost any type of outcome or consensus that hasn't even been tried yet, that dialogue, that roundtable, that discussion about possible solutions hasn't been tried, and there's still some time to do that. And I understand all of your concerns as well, and that's why I've tried to address those and looked at those time frames very carefully to ensure that it doesn't go beyond that. And I think there's ample time to work on that and come back. And I'm not going anywhere, by the way. I will be here, and so be happy to work with you as well, because I think this is critically important. I lost a lot of my ancestors through the Holocaust, and I've been able to go back and visit some of those locations, and it's critically important. And I'm very sensitive to this, and particularly as my district as well has one of the largest residencies of APIs, quite frankly, of Pacific Islanders in CD12, as most people don't know or aren't aware of any place in the entire city of LA. So I'm very sensitive to this, and I think, though, that there very well could be a good dialogue and some opportunities. And again, there's no risk in the time on this. My concern is a risk that if it did go to some kind of litigation, there's two issues. One, it sets a precedent, and we can never have the opportunity to have this discussion again. And two, could lose it all and not have any designation or any memorialization and opportunity. So I think there could be a way to do that. But thank you very much for entertaining that. That will be all of that will be my motion.
Okay. Did you get all that, Roberto?
Yes.
Okay. I will second that motion, and two primary reasons. One, he is staying in this committee. My last day is the last day of June of this year. I believe Councilor Weezar will be here as well. So now this whole organization and all of the advocates have access to two council members and a third one that will be named. So those issues and drilling down to those decisions can be engaged with the committee members now. Now that's before us. Now we could have that conversation. We can bring in the staff. We can bring in the owners. And we can do everything that needs to be done to rightfully and in the most dignified manner represent this location for its experience that we want to treasure. So I'm very confident that that can be achieved. And it is in no way dismissing or diminishing what was said today. It's trying to find the strongest legal ground with the greatest amount of participation by all of the stakeholders who want to be involved.
One last thing on that is you also have the opportunity not only to continue to work with Councilmember Alarcon even beyond his time in the building. He's mentioned to me he's not going anywhere either. He'll be around and involved in issues he cares about, and he's made it a point of sharing that information privately and publicly. But he also have the opportunity between now and even his departure from the council to put forth the framework to ensure that it goes beyond, and he can and should continue to participate through these time periods, but at least to set up that framework and the process with Mr. Bernstein, who I have a lot of faith in, and has been able to bring people together on very difficult and sensitive matters like this, and has done a really good job in the past. And so we leave you in good hands, but we welcome you back to hear what we're able to achieve, and I look forward to working with you as well. And thank you.
Okay, so I want to, again, Ms. Ochi, and this will be the last speaker. Good afternoon, ma'am.
I don't know whether it's appropriate to say anything, but first I want to say that I'm wearing a new hearing aid, so I really didn't understand much of the conversation.
Uh-oh.
Having said that, I just want to say that I'm here because I support the Tuna Canyon designation, and I'm concerned that what I believe is that you're going to give some credence to the cultural of historical recommendations, and I feel that when you just look at what they referred to was the lack of structure, and in the there's an ability for plants and other kinds of things that can be preserved beyond structure. So I would suggest that you not just rely on that. And number two, I don't know the rules, but I think that when the motion has been made by Councilman Alarcon in City Council, I think it should go to them and not go to another committee. We can have a planning conversation with the developers and others at another time. I think out of courtesy to an outgoing councilman, I'd ask that it goes to them first before any kind of conversation with the developers. Thank you.
Well, he will not be excluded, believe me. He will not be excluded. Okay.
So, Councilman, two things. The file or the issues continue to a date certain, which is July the 23rd. That takes us past the time limit of July the 17th. As such, we need the 15-day extension, and the mechanism to get that extension is to do a motion. So we would.
I believe that was part of my instruction earlier, but my motion would be that on July 3rd, then it come back for that possible extension. If not, we'll hear it in council.
Okay, very good. But the issue, Councilman, is that the mechanism to do it is through a written council motion.
Right,
so
on the council floor.
On the council floor. So Mr. Alarcon, the CLA can work with his office to prepare that motion, that written motion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we know that has to be done on the council floor. Right.
Again, Ken Bernstein, just as clarification, could the committee, while continuing the item, send on a recommendation via motion at committee today to extend the time period for 15 days?
Sure, as long as that committee report is sent to the council and the council votes on it.
That was in fact what I believe I was recommending earlier. So the recommendation as part of the overall recommendations is that committee report come back to council on July 3rd.
Okay, got it.
For that 15-day extension.
Okay. As long as that's embedded in the committee report.
Correct. So
Yes.
if you
Yes,
could
sir.
embed that in the committee report.
Yes, sir.
And then that it come back to this committee with a report back on what occurred with the working group.
All right. So the committee's retaining jurisdiction over the underlying case, but this 15-day extension will proceed
Yes.
on to council.
Yes.
Just for
Correct.
clarification.
Yes.
Okay.
For July 3rd scheduled date. Correct. Okay.
I'll work with the clerk.
Madam Clerk, are you okay?
I believe I understand, sir, that the recommendations for the 2 report backs and to establish the working group, as well as the request to extend the deadline for additional 15 days, be prepared and scheduled for council prior to July 3rd, and with the additional recommendation that the whole matter be referred back to the Planning and Land Use Management Committee meeting of July 23rd. So
Yes.
we're good.
Yes.
Okay, so that will be the action of this committee. Okay. Are there anybody here for general public comment on items not on the agenda? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.